branché? C'est branché? Oui, c'est branché. Bonjour. Merci d'être venu.
So hello, thanks for coming up this morning. There's so many of you. There's only about 12 actually. A third of the people here are my colleagues, the other third dealing with the sound, and then there's the rest of you guys. So I'm Caroline Roux. I work for Mintel. Mintel is a company that does market studies, and we're consultants in market products. We're international. Our head office is in London. We've got offices in the US, Canada, Brazil, China, Australia, Japan. So there you go. So we're spread around the world. Our speciality, our particularity at Mintel, is that under the same roof, under the same umbrella, we've got consumer data, market data, and we're particularly known for our new products database. We put in every month 20,000 new products, whether they're food products or it can be beauty, household goods, cleaning goods, or whatever. And these are things that people buy around the world. We look at trends, innovation, market, consumer, and product innovation. So today, I've decided to talk about something that I've called moralisation of consumer. I use the term this because it's a buzzword during Macron's campaign, moralisation of political life. We heard a lot about that. So I thought it would be quite funny and interesting to see how this applied to the food industry and choices of consumers when they make their decisions and buying stuff. So, first of all, just to say that it's quite alarming, something quite alarming, on the loss of trust of French consumers in relation to the food industry. Our data dates from 2017. It would be interesting to look at the questionnaire, given the scandals that have been around since December. But in 2017, 30% of French people say that products sold by the food industry are worthy of trust or are actually edible, and 41% say they don't really know whether the products are edible or not. Just a quick word on this. I gave you some data on France. This is because we're in France. We've got data as well on other consumers, the same data. I've got it on the next slide here, in fact, on other countries. And of course, we can look at the data at a much closer level if you're interested in the same data that's just for women or just for millennials. So we've got that data too. So if we compare the attitude of the French to the food industry, there's a lack of confidence, a lack of trust, even more so than other countries. You can see 60% of Spanish people trust the products that are available. They think that they are fit for consumption. So it's not particularly linked to the food industry. I think it's more linked to a cultural trait that we are a nation of skeptics in France, could even say cynics. Now, this is linked as well, this lack of trust, is that due to the fact that French consumers have a fairly negative vision of their motivation of companies. About 2/3 of French people say that companies want to make money rather than make quality products. And there's an equal proportion of people who think that the functional profits, or the functional benefits, if you like, improving digestion or cardiac health, is an excuse to increase prices rather than an actual real consumer benefit. So fairly negative, and of course we need to work on this to try and rebuild trust between consumers and industry. Now, there's a loss of trust in the industry, but as well, people are more and more demanding as well. In Mintel, there's a trend called biotology, bideology. So it's a mix of bi and ideology. And people buy with their hearts, but as well with their own particular values, cultural values, ideological values. And in ideology, of course, you can put ethics, you can put politics. So the values have increased growth in the choice, hence the title of this presentation. So in these ideologies, of course, there's environmental questions that we talk about more and more, and that we'll keep on talking about. So taking into account more than before the consequences, environmental consequences of the products they buy. People are taking, and you have much greater awareness of what they're buying and of this type of issue. You know, GM, genetically modified, for instance, is something that doesn't attract people. 40% of people say they would never buy GM products, and a quarter of consumers won't buy certain things which are on special offer, so they don't throw away things that they don't throw away leftovers. So we're talking about legislation on special offers. So special offer is not something that's of interest for people in France. Maybe there's food waste that comes because of this. So special offers maybe for things that aren't going to be that are not perishable, but for fresh products you've got to weigh things in the balance between an attractive cost on the one hand and on the other cheese that's going to end up in the bin because it hasn't been eaten. So there's a conference this afternoon on animal welfare. It's not something that concerns all products. So there is more and more awareness of this, particularly with women, particularly young people, the millennials, or the generation just after that even. It's an issue that they're interested in. They're very concerned about this. Here is some data for buying yogurt and milk. French consumers that take into account animal welfare in their considerations. I'm not saying that it's the initial motivation of a purchase, knowing whether animals are well treated when people are buying milk or yogurt, but it's coming into play. There are French companies who are taking into account this sort of issue. Leodama, they put on their packaging the fact that the cows were grass-fed, they're field-fed. So this is a question of the milk itself, but you're beginning to see it on processed products as well, transformed products in the dairy industry. Now, of course, this trend, the interest of consumers for animal welfare, has to go hand in hand with non-dairy products as well. So vegetal milks. There is again the question of animal welfare that comes into play with people buying these products. Now, a particularity in France is people's taste for small. People trust small businesses because you imagine that small companies, little structures, are less motivated by money and more by their mission, the quality of their products. Now, of course, this is very important when the data, you're looking at the data. If you're a big retailer, if you're a big brand, how can you gain trust of consumers and at the same time having the attitude and the values of a small business, even though you're a massive group? What we've observed as well since 2017, there's these big companies which, instead of innovating in-house, instead of buying companies, they've got a system of nurseries, and they leave the freedom to startups to continue developing, to carry on having their motivation, their ethics, their concern for innovation in the startup. But these companies are going to have a financial backup, sometimes in terms of supply chain, they're going to give this back up to the small companies. Here's an example. General Mills.
Je vous ai mis des photos
Here's some photos of
de petites marques
little brands that General Mills
d'incuber.
has decided to incubate.
Des petites marques, c'est essentiellement des marques américaines ici.
So they're American brands.
Gazpacho, je sais pas pourquoi
There's
il y a un logo
gazpacho.
Gazpacho sur mon
I
site.
don't know why it's lying down on the slide, but anyway, it's a bottle of gazpacho
Vous avez des
that you can
chips
drink
en
on the
viande
go. You've got crisps.
À base de choux, type choucroute.
There's sort of sauerkraut crisps.
Probiotiques, par exemple.
So the probiotic idea.
Qui est aussi sans lait. Du cottage cheese.
You've got cottage cheese, which is a classic in the US, in every US house. It's coming back into fashion because cottage cheese is very trendy in terms of, it's very low fat, it's very rich in proteins. So,
il y a aussi, vous voyez, Beyond Meat, qui est un burger à base de pâte viande.
and so there's, and as well, vegetable-based hamburgers as well. So General Mills, we know there are others doing that as well. All the big groups are doing this now. So what it means as well is that these small companies are going to be able to survive a bit longer than if they weren't backed up by big companies. And so it's good news for innovation, but it's a threat as well for the bigger groups, because there's going to be more smaller ones in competition. Another source of influence, which can be a threat or an opportunity for industry, is the technological environment. Half of French people believe that the fact that they've got the possibility of finding information and communicating online, in particular in social networks, this means companies have to be transparent. So there's a big demand for transparency in this context of lost confidence, but companies as well, who now have to, if they don't play the game, somebody else will. And if they're not transparent on their ingredients, the way they function, and so on. So when you've got something bad on a company, it goes around very quickly. But as well, when you've got an opportunity for small companies, there's word of mouth, which works really well. It's very cheap to get buzz. This sort of medium is a way of communicating on innovation. In Mintel, we've got a trend on everything that's texture, and innovation on color. This sort of innovation, it's anecdotal, not supported by marketing campaigns or so on, but the interest is that they come onto the social networks and then they create a buzz, and it's sort of free marketing in a way, thanks to social media. So companies which say that they have to be transparent, and it's in this approach that Emmanuel Faber changed the bylaws of Danone in the US. 2 years ago, they bought White Wave. It's #1 of vegetable milk, plant-based milk products, and it's now called Danone Wave. Danone Wave, as the Americans say, apparently. Emmanuel Faber changed the company and set up this company as a B Corp rather, which means that the company has financial targets to achieve, but as well social objectives in relation to society, the environment they're in, and the planet. So apart from what Manuel Faber wants to do is here it's in English, because he said this in English, where he says he's not doing things because he's a philanthropist. He says we're doing this because consumers are increasingly requesting evidence that companies behave properly. And so they have actual, proper, good, irreproachable ethics. So companies have to be transparent, and those that react like Danone. Now, in terms of product development, what does it mean? Well, As I said at the beginning of the presentation, at Mintel, we've got our database. It's called GNPD, Global New Product Database, a massive database, all the products which are sold in 60 markets, 20,000 products in the database every month. And here's the trends. I mean, this is the way I question the database. I asked the database to bring out all the innovations in food and drink that were launched in France, and to look whether there were allegations on ethical, eco-friendly, or natural. So it can be organic, additive-free, whatever. And you can see that in 2012, it was natural that dominated in what was claimed in the claims about products launched in France. Now, since then, the trend has turned around a bit because now it's more ethical and eco-friendly, particularly recyclable packaging. That's one of the claims that we've got, which dominates innovation in France. Now, if we go down a bit deeper into this, if we delve down a little bit more, if you look at the theme, whether it's ethical or natural, here it's at a finer level. A third of innovations. Can I get the mouse? Here it goes. Yeah. Get it out of the hole. Yeah. A third of innovations for food and drink in France are linked to packaging in 2017. Organic is increasing. Ethics, human, ethical, animal. We're talking about animal welfare for the time being. This is something which is quite marginal in France. So potentially there are opportunities to communicate on that, maybe a little bit more on pack. And allegations don't concern all categories, but you can see that here we should be, about 2% of products launched in France in 2017 with a claim on animal welfare. The way companies try to reconstruct this thing, rebuild trust with consumers, and are involved in consumers' interest, areas of interest, taking into account their values and their political opinions. For instance, Starbucks in the US has decided to hire 10,000 refugees over the next 5 years. The announcement was made when there was a lot of talk about the arrival of refugees from Africa to Europe. So Starbucks said they're going to commit to a figure. So it's tangible, 10,000 over 5 years. Data on consumers in the US, because it's a market that we cover very well too. 43% of consumers in the US think that companies who are associated with charities have a positive effect on everybody, not just those that they decide to try and help. So in Belgium, another example is Lidl, a distributor, a retailer. And when you look at the weight of Europe of Lidl in Europe, they've decided only to buy swine that was ethically reared and sustainably reared. And they want to have the best life label for their pigs. So this sort of decision is a decision which makes it possible to get a bit of buzz, to get a bit of feedback in the media for this sort of information. So animal welfare again with French consumers as well for buying meat. Another question, much more political in terms of diversity, cultural diversity of our societies and populations. In Hamburg, in Germany, a supermarket decided to remove foreign products from its shelves so that consumers could realize the extent to which Germany, or this supermarket in particular, needed its European suppliers, and as food, German food had a very poor choice to give when it wasn't open to the world. So it's an interesting campaign because probably it will have a big impact on sales of the supermarket on that day, but a decision which was political from this supermarket. We know that the origin of products in France is something that is very interesting for people in France. They want authenticness and authenticity. There's a trend towards more trust for products which come from France, whether it's potatoes or cheese, but there is this search for authenticity. When you buy Parmesan or feta, it's better if it comes from Italy or Greece. Another example, this is a company, and it's the packaging. Heinz has got a clean label. It's a very vague thing. It means all sorts of things and very different things, whether you're in the UK, the US, or wherever. A clean label is, first of all, shorter list of ingredients. You take off all the artificial ingredients, but the clean label, you've got allergens, but it could mean as well, technically, visually, it means a much purer, cleaner labeling. And it's the choice that Heinz made with its ketchup in Brazil, because they decided to put on the front of the package their list of ingredients. And if it works on the front, it means it's a short list, as you can see here, in fact. Tomato, sugar, vinegar, salt. Cebola is onion, and natural flavorings. So a very short list of ingredients so that it can be put in the packaging. And so this is very good because it replaces all sorts of marketing claims.
Et ce qui est intéressant aussi dans cette tendance clean label, c'est que les consommateurs français.
So French consumers tell us that here 39% of them think that when there's too much information on a package, it's a bit suspicious. People wonder why there's, you've got to put so much on there. So data which goes in this direction of much cleaner labeling, it just gives you the nitty-gritty and nothing to hide. And then apart from companies and packaging design, there's also the trend for more transparency, and this is backed up by governments. In France, you've heard about the law on cameras, putting surveillance cameras, closed-circuit TV, in abattoirs. They're doing the same thing in slaughterhouses in the UK. It's a government which is installing transparency here. There's something as well on labeling and nutritional values. It's becoming something that comes from the institution and in response to consumers. And if companies don't play the game, legislators will impose this transparency.
Some other examples here, quite amusing. Here, using social networks. This is the chips, crisps brand McCoy's, their cameras. It's what they call live streaming on Facebook for 4 hours to show their production line, the crisps. We've seen lots of examples, say, for beer brewers, the artisanal ones that invite the customers in to tour the breweries. We know that breweries and perhaps in dairy farms, you don't see the products a lot. I worked for Saint-Hubert, and people said if you see milk in the plant, that means there's a problem. If you see the liquids actually outside of the silos, and because they come in and go right out in packages, you shouldn't see the actual liquids in the plants. I think it's the same for chips. I've never toured one, but I think it's a way of just getting the message across that they have nothing to hide, and they're happy to have cameras in their plants. And the last point here, food for thought. To what extent we decide to be transparent. Yes, we have consumers who want more transparency in terms of ingredients from the beginning to the end of the production chain, the value chain. They want to know where the product comes from, which cow, what the cow's name is, what the farmer's name is that raised the cow, where the packaging comes from. So consumers want lots of information, but they won't necessarily go out and get it. But they want to know that that information is available, that that's not being hidden from them. They may not go out and dig it up, but they want to know that it's available. Now, some companies go a bit further. Rather than just talking about ethics, transparency, they get political. We talked about Starbucks. We can also say that maybe it's not politics, but humanitarianism. We see in Europe certain alcohol brands, certain spirits that take a political stand. We saw that during the election of Sarkozy. You had Sarkozy in Holland. In that election, you had Michel et Augustin. They made special packaging for that, and I think there were some battles in the supermarkets. Okay, here's an example of Smirnoff in the U.S. saying that they'd be happy to talk about their ties to Russia under oath. So a bit of a throwback there to, actually it's a huge throwback, wink wink, to Trump's problems with his campaign and the ties to Russian collusion. So there was a brand of, make a beer, maybe it was Heineken or Carlsberg, becoming societal, some controversies, be it homosexuality, gender equality. So you have to think about to what extent brands can take position. So if you're a brand of beer, can you moralize on homosexuality or gender equality? I don't know, up to you to decide on that. But they have to be careful to not go too far in the positioning, because nobody is really irreproachable. Nobody's perfect. So glass houses and all that. Finishing up on transparency, this is no longer reserved, say, for elites, for educated people. Only certain people used to have access to information. Now everyone has to have access to information, transparency, traceability for all consumers, no matter their resource levels or revenue levels. There's no happy few that have access to food that's better for that's healthier, and then the lesser off people should be getting lesser quality goods. So no, traceability, transparency for everyone. Okay, 3 points to remember, to be thinking about this for this first presentation. Now, why not segment based on ideological principles? We hear a lot about millennials. We tend to segment the markets by generations. How about maybe segmenting the market based on ideology? As I was saying, we expect companies to take position, yes, and have an ethical stance, but they have to watch out for the limits. They have to be diplomatic, not go beyond, not overstep in certain areas. And what's key is communication on transparency, on the company's values. Now we have the means. Doesn't have to just be TV campaigns, posters, and all that. It can be the internet, and you can constantly communicate with constantly communicate with your consumers or your potential consumers. So that's what I wanted to talk about. This is how we describe ourselves. We are transparent. We are just the world's leading market intelligence agency. Nothing more, nothing less. If you have any questions, we're happy to answer those. If you would like the presentation, we're happy to share that with you. Just give me your card, make the request, and I will send that to you. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have right now here in the audience in front of everyone else, or you can send those to me in private.